Now, the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries says rhino poaching has shifted to KwaZulu-Natal. The province lost 244 rhinos in 2022 alone. Minister Barbara Creecy says yesterday that the Kruger National Park lost 124 rhinos during the same period. Meanwhile, no poaching was reported in 17 of South Africa's other national parks. For more on this and, of course, those frightening numbers, we're getting some analysis and some clarity from Minister Creecy, who joins us. Minister, good evening. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Thabo, and greetings to your viewers.
So 40% fewer rhino killed in the Kruger National Park in the 2022 financial year. However, there is a number of losses we are seeing now in private reserves and as well as KwaZulu-Natal. Why is poaching shifting away from the national parks?
Well, I think that we have had sustained anti-poaching efforts, particularly in Kruger, for some time now. We've combined this with a very extensive dehorning program. And while these decrease in figures is good news for Kruger, of course we are very concerned that the problem has just shifted to other locations, now into provincial parks in KwaZulu-Natal and also into some of the private reserves. And one assumes that this is because it's now easier to poach in those locations than it is to poach in the traditional hunting ground of the Kruger Park.
Yeah. And is it, Minister, I mean, how are the provincial parks protected? How are they managed and how are they controlled?
Well, all parks, provincial and national parks, have ranger services. Some provincial parks and also private reserves have dehorning programs, and of course in private reserves that are often smaller and better equipped, they also have electronic surveillance and so on. But I think that the real issue is that we have now set up what we call the Environment Fusion Center that helps us to coordinate all of the intelligence we have around rhino poaching. In recent times, we've been working much more closely with KwaZulu-Natal so that we can share information. And this, of course, is assisting us. We had some arrests a couple of months ago. 4 syndicate members were picked up there. So we do believe that if we work more closely together and if we use the partnerships that we have with the National Prosecuting Authority, various international agencies, and of course our own intelligence that we are collecting on rhino poaching, we might be able to assist KZN, to get the poaching numbers down in those provincial parks as well.
Yeah. There are some who are saying, criticizing particularly KZN Wildlife, saying they are sitting on a report that is firstly exposing some security gaps in a sense that, one, there are untrained military vets being slipped into the system, into position of rangers. There is outdated weaponry for rangers. There's some uncontrolled access points at some of the parks. How true are these claims, Minister, and what are we doing about them?
Well, Ezemvelo doesn't fall under my direct authority, so I think these are questions you would need to ask the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government. But I think that it's no secret that since the COVID-19 pandemic, all tourism facilities saw a decrease in international visitors, and this has heavily impacted on revenue streams. It has happened to us throughout our national parks, and many of the provincial parks are very severely affected. So obviously, in that situation, you're also going to find challenges with regard to the equipping of ranger services and their ability to fight seriously syndicated crime operations.
So what's key here, and as you put it, you've just mentioned now, is being able to get the syndicates and to focus on them and eradicate the syndicates. Is work being done particularly around that? I see others are saying most of our rhinos, for example, would be safer in Rwanda than here in the country. Those optics certainly do not look really, really great for South Africa.
Look, rhino poaching is a very serious problem. It is part of organized crime. That is why we not only focus on boots on the ground and dehorning, but we also focus on establishing a range of partnerships within the security services and also internationally. I think international best practice tells us that if you want to deal with syndicated crime, you can't just work on the foot soldiers. Which is what you're doing if you're primarily focusing on ranger services. You have to look at traffickers, you have to look at money laundering, you have to look at international destinations, and all of these kind of focuses have seen significant arrests in recent times. Last year we arrested 28 traffickers. We had 2 huge horn busts, one in Dubai, one in Singapore. And we've also effected arrest of 13 people for money laundering who were involved in bribing rangers. So I think that this is the kind of approach that you need. But I think in the current context, we are finding that dehorning is an important intervention, and it doesn't come cheap. But we do believe that this is another tool in our arsenal that should be more widely used.
As with a number of other crime prevention interventions in the country, arrests, they tend to be quite high. Prosecutions, though, tend to paint a different kind of picture in terms of those who are successfully prosecuted. How are you doing as far as the rhino poachers are concerned in those syndicates?
Look, we had, I think it was 97 successful prosecutions last year. And what we also saw was some very stiff sentencing, up to 15 years for killing a rhino, and significantly more years added on if money laundering, possession of a weapon, and so on were involved. Recently, we saw on appeal a poacher actually getting 4 more years, so that in total they got 15 years for killing a rhino. So I think that gradually, as the conviction rate improves and as there is very stiff sentencing taking place, it does to a certain extent act as a deterrent.
And are you picking up a trend of repeat offenders possibly moving around the country as you're looking at these cases that are coming out from KZN?
Yes, definitely. And that is where our cooperation in sharing information about incursions, about perpetrators, and also about crime scenes obviously helps us in tracking down those who have moved from Mpumalanga to KwaZulu-Natal.
Dehorning, you're saying quite an expensive exercise, but certainly a strategy in your toolbox that you can possibly use. What other strategies? A suggestion of moving rhinos to protected national conservation areas or suitable, safer habitat. What would that campaign entail?
Well, one of the issues that you have to consider in terms of the long-term protection of rhino is the question of genetic diversity. Because if you have small populations that are interbreeding, that obviously can increase the risk of a particular species becoming extinct. So part of the reason for setting up new populations in other locations is to assist in maintaining the genetic biodiversity. You know, I think it's very important to remember, and this is in a way part of the sad story that one is confronting with regard to Umfolozi is that was the park which actually led to the repopulation of rhinos in all parks across the country. A very, very successful conservation effort that was undertaken there during the 1970s and the 1980s. And as I say, it's very sad that we are now seeing that tremendous legacy coming under threat in Umfolozi itself. But it was through maintaining genetic biodiversity that we were able to do that in the first place. And South Africa, in fact, is sharing rhino populations with a range of southern African countries, so that we are reintroducing populations into those countries as well.
It is one thing to fight the crime at our national level, but as you've mentioned, this is a crime that is transatlantic, or so to speak, and it goes to other parts of the world. Is that collaboration at that level happening?
We have got excellent collaboration with the governments of Vietnam and China. We've recently developed better cooperation with Laos and also with Singapore. And we believe that it is that international cooperation that is allowing us to not only make arrests here on the ground, but also to start making some international busts of traffickers and international arrests.
Minister, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on and your intervention tonight. That is Minister Barbara Creecy there, Minister for Environment, Forestry and Fisheries.